I, female 24 years old, was driving by myself across country to get to my son who was with my ex. I had been out of state taking care of a sick family member. It was the middle of the night in New Mexico and I saw police lights behind me. I was exhausted and annoyed because I hadn't been speeding or anything. There were not really any other cars on the road at the time, and I was close to the exit for the hotel I had planned to stop at for the night. I pulled over and the cop came over to the driver's side window, which in itself was weird, because usually they come to the passenger window on busy roads, and this was a highway. So I gave him all of my stuff and he just stared at me for the longest time. He walked to his car and then returned almost immediately. He told me to step outside the car. Okay, so I was worried at this point because I'd gotten tickets before, but being asked to step outside the car was not the norm. But I did as he said, and he asked if I had been drinking. I said I hadn't been, and then I asked why he pulled me over. He said I was driving erratic, which was definitely not true. He then asked me if I was a terrorist, which was absurd. I was just a young American woman just driving, so there wasn't really any reason for this question. It was weird, and I was a veteran with an ID also. He gave me a walk-the-line drunk driving test, which I passed, and then said he needed to search my car to see if I had drugs. I thought about this for a minute because I knew my rights and all, but it was so late and I was so tired. I just didn't want to deal with all the BS or refusing, so I gave him the okay, because I knew I didn't have anything in my car. So when he got to my truck, he opened up a small suitcase that I had, with my dancer and stripper stuff in it. He asked about it and I told him I was a stripper. This really set him off and he started screaming at me about being a trash person. This pissed me off and I started looking around at my situation. I was alone for the most part with this weird guy, and every once in a while a car would pass. For the most part, the roads were empty. It was the middle of night and I didn't have anything on myself to protect myself, and he had a gun. He told me that I needed to walk back into the tree line that was next to the road. I stared at him and said no. I then demanded that he call for backup and that other officers come. He was thrown off by this. I said I wanted a female officer and I would no longer comply with anything he said. And then I started trying to wave down cars when they passed by. He told me to calm down and wrote out a speeding ticket and let me go. I never paid the ticket and never heard a word about it. This was 20 years ago. At the time, I was really shaken and I just forgot about it, but looking back, I don't think he was a real cop. Some nights, my son and I drive his father to work so I can visit family as they live close by. It was around 9:30 at night on a highway in Northern California. My son had just fallen asleep in the car on the way to his father's work, which is a craft store. We were in a 2-lane road in which it would eventually turn into one. As it was turning to one, he slowed down, letting me pass. As I passed him, he turns on his lights, but no siren went off. The car was all black, and I couldn't even see who the person was or what they looked like. I pulled over, getting my insurance and license out. Did I do something wrong? I thought. Well, he let me pass, and it was a passing zone. As he was walking towards my car, I noticed something. He had no uniform. He was just wearing all black. He almost looked like a shadow. Though I didn't question it at first, I now realize how much danger I could have been in. I showed him my license and asked if I did anything wrong. He looks down at it for a solid minute, then hands it back. I looked at him again and then asked, "What's your badge number? What department are you from?" He didn't reply back. He stared into me. In the back of my car where my son was sleeping, then walked off, started his car and left. I drove as fast as I could, picked up my son's father and told him what happened. I was crying and shaking because I had so many questions. Now that it's been a few hours since it happened, I have so many more questions. Was my son the reason he didn't do more? Was he a sex trafficker? What would he have done had my son not been there? Where can you even buy cop lights similar to real ones? I have never had any problems with police. Every time I get a ticket or pulled over, I am very respectful. None of those involved have criminal backgrounds, and I just graduated a large university with a criminal justice pre-law degree. My two best friends, Ali and Lena, are generally very nice people. At the time, we were all newly 21, and they are fairly attractive young women. I have the good personality. We all live in within 5 minutes of walking distance of each other's homes, and the town itself that we live in is just under 1 square mile. It's one of those everyone knows each other and each other's business type towns. We jokingly used to say that you could do literally whatever you wanted there, because we had never ever seen a cop. The college semester had just ended, so we settled into our usual summer routine. I would get off work, waitressing late nights the town over. I would drive to Allie's, have a beer or two, hang out, and go home. If I ever had more than 2 beers, I walked home or slept there so I could get drunk. One of the first nights of summer, I was leaving Allie's around 1 a.m. I turned onto my street and noticed a car parked in this weird lot that is essentially grass and dirt a couple houses down from mine. As I drive by, I see that it's a cop. I've never seen one in our town, so it was actually a little weird. I remember texting Allie and being all, "There's a cop on my street." I got home and went to bed and forgot about it. I went to Allie's with Lana almost every night. We don't have many other friends or money to go to the bar, honestly. Every night I would drive home. The cop would be in the weird lot. I always saw a shadow of a guy in the car, but it was dark, usually after 1 a.m., and I'm not about to stop and see who it is. He was never there during the day. One night, following the same routine, I drove by the lot, and as I did, I saw the cop's car's headlights flip on. The car whipped out of the lot and sped up so close to the back of my car that I honestly thought I was going to be hit. Immediately, I'm terrified. He is dangerously close to my car. He flips on his red and blue lights, but at that point, I'm about to turn into my driveway. I turn in and turn off my car, but don't exit my vehicle. I honestly thought I was being pulled over in my own driveway. I'm scrambling for my license, nervous as hell, when I see the cop just waiting at the top of my driveway. Lights turned off at this point. He sits for a minute and drives off doing way over the speed limit on a sleepy side street. I'm scared for a few reasons. I had, at the time, a very distinct car. My lovable old PT Cruiser with a red racing stripe to ensure I never got laid. My dad's gift to me as a 17-year-old. The cop knew my car. If I had the same routine every night, and he was a little observant, he would see my car turn into my driveway always after 1 a.m. I also wasn't doing anything illegal. I was shaken, but I decided to forget it. I texted my friends, and we all agreed that it was weird, but whatever. He was either being a dick or I had forgot to put my blinker on, and he decided to let me go. It was whatever until it happened every night after. For a week straight, every time I turned down my street after Allie's, the cop flipped on his lights, rode my car's bumper to my driveway, and sped off. It's clear at this point he's just being a dick, but I don't get the point. I was scared, honestly, but my friends always turned it into a joke, so I guess I did too. The element that made it so hard to comprehend this situation was that this was a cop and I was younger, more shy than I am now, and really didn't know how to address this issue. This cop did have one distinct quality: his brakes. They were the squeakiest brakes I had ever heard in my entire life. You could hear him coming around a turn from across the state. He had earned himself a nickname, Squeaky Brakes Cop. This harassment happened for a week. By the 3rd week of summer, Squeaky Brakes was gone. No one tailed me home. All was well. Until my friends got their first taste of old Squeaky Brakes. Allie and I were sitting on her front porch as she smoked a cigarette. It was about 5 p.m. and we were making plans for the night, drinking on her porch alone. Lana was on her way. We were in the middle of laughing about something when I heard them. The squeaky brakes. I said something along the lines of, "I bet this is the cop coming around the corner. He'll finally see who's been bothering me." I was right. Allie laughed a little as he drove past her house. She agreed he had the squeakiest brakes in the world. He slowed down as he drove by and then disappeared out of sight. But we heard him coming back, and you could tell he was driving fast. He slammed on his squeaky fucking brakes and stopped at the end of Allie's driveway, and then got out of the car. He was far enough away that if I ever ran into him in the street, I wouldn't be able to ID him. He had those aviator glasses on, his little cop hat, the gun, the badge, the uniform, the works. But he didn't speak. He just stood at the end of the driveway, hands on his hips, looking at us. I mentioned earlier, I was a criminal justice, pre-law major, and my friends considered me their go-to free lawyer, even though I'm not, because I know just a little bit better what to say to cops / what your rights are. Allie whispered to me something along the lines of, "What the fuck is happening?" So I decided whatever, we had to address this, and I called out to him. "Can we help you, officer?" He didn't speak for a minute, but eventually speaks up. "What are you young ladies up to? Smoking weed out of that funny smelling cigarette?" It was so surreal. Who even says things like that? Calmly answered no, it was just a regular cigarette, and Allie held up her box of Marlboro Reds as some form of proof. He didn't answer, just stared at us. Then he said so coldly, Well, if there's no weed up there, why don't you invite me inside so I can check for myself, and we won't have any problems. Pretty girls shouldn't smoke. Problems? Pretty girls shouldn't smoke. Whatever. Now I realize this is a cop on a power trip, trying to be intimidating. Allie is clearly nervous, so I do my thing and say, "No, officer, that won't be necessary. We were just going inside anyway. There are no issues here, and this is private property. I really hope you have a great rest of your day, though. Thank you." I literally grab Allie and pull her inside. I acted cool in front of the guy, but I'm nervous. What was this cop's deal? We watched as he got in his car and left, always hitting those squeaky brakes. Allie texted me that week saying squeaky brakes had been circling her house every night. He had stopped following me home, but he had also been circling my house. I always heard his brakes leave the end of my street when I was in bed. My bed was on the second floor, directly under this huge window I always left open that faces the street. I always peeked up and saw this car leaving when I heard the brakes. One night I was in bed, heard the brakes, but didn't hear the car make a turn or drive. It sounded like he stopped right outside my window. I was tired and used to the cop's nonsense, so I didn't bother looking. I was in the process of trying to sleep when out of nowhere, my room lights up. Huge bright light just illuminating my room. Honest to God, my first thought was an alien abduction, until rational thoughts replaced it. I sit up in bed, terrified, and look out the window to be blinded by the brightest light I've ever seen. It takes me a minute, but I realize it's the fucking spotlight and squeaky brakes cop car. He is literally shining me down with a spotlight in the comfort of my own bedroom. I'm scared, angry, and confused, etc. That to me was too far. I had to do something. It was an invasion of privacy, and I realized in order to know which room is mine, he had to have been watching my house. The next night, me and all my friends all meet up at Allie's as usual. Lena still hadn't seen the cop. That night, he must have circled once an hour when he saw my car at Allie's, so Lena finally knew what we were talking about, and finally understood the nickname Squeaky Brakes Cop. We came to a weird agreement, and the agreement was that we just kind of had to deal with it. It sounds stupid, and I know he had crossed the line in terms of doing his job and abusing his power, but who could we tell? The cops? Honestly, we were terrified it would get worse if we did. In hindsight, and being a few years older now, I'm kicking myself that we didn't. But we were 21 and didn't want to be involved in anything like that. It's kind of funny, or we can handle this. He's got a crush on us. This was the general consensus. The final showdown with the cop happened the last week of summer. All summer the cop was always circling, and living in fear of this dude just became an everyday thing. One of the last nights of summer, we got a ton of beer and decided to get stupid blackout drunk in Allie's yard around a fire pit as a goodbye to summer. We had been drinking more heavily than normal, and we heard the ever-faithful squeak of those brakes. I fucking hate this guy. I really fucking hate that there's nothing else he would rather do than bother us, and we never do anything wrong. Allie starts going off in this rant, yada yada yada. He circles once, and slows as he sees us sitting in the yard. He shines his spotlight on us, bright as fuck, and Allie blows a kiss suggestively. He turns it off, and we laugh. Then he speeds away. I don't want to see him again. Let's go inside before he gets back, so he looks stupid coming to look for us again, is Lena's suggestion. We all agree and are a little drunk and decide to run as fast as we can to the door. I trip, and holding a 30-pack, fall to the ground, and the beers fall everywhere. It's hysterical. We were all laughing picking them up, and then we hear the cop coming back. He pulls up again, but we were in hysterics because my fall was so comical. He must see us just laughing, and I don't know if that's what set him off, but what happened next was terrifying. He rolled down his window and screamed, "Get the fuck inside!" and flipped on his red and blue lights. We don't know whether he meant inside his cruiser or inside the house, but we obviously opted for the house. We ran up our porch and into the house. The cop sat there outside for a minute, and then sped off, and must have been doing it 90 miles per hour on a 25 miles per hour road. We ran to Allie's room and opened her blinds. We heard him coming, so we peeked out. He would slow down in front of her house, turn on his lights, and whip off. This time it wasn't funny. It seemed menacing. It seemed incredibly aggressive. We counted, and he circled her house 38 times. After deeming it safe, we cuddled and had more beers and fell asleep together. It got to the point of harassment that I did the next best thing to calling the cops. I told my mom. She actually took me seriously and said in the morning she wakes up at like 4 to walk our dog. There's been a cop hanging out near our driveway, but he's always gone when she gets back. She said once she asked him if he could move, because he was blocking our driveway, and he just rolled up his window. The night we credit to the harassment ending was the night I took a stand. I'm a light sleeper, and it was about 2:30 a.m. when a bright light jerked me from my sleep. The spotlight in my room, again. Summer was about over, and this cop has essentially ruined it for me, and I was done. I got my bearings and went to the window. I stood in it, blinds all the way up, until the cop turned off the spotlight. He didn't leave. It was a very weird, uncomfortable showdown. I grabbed my phone, turned the flashlight on, shoved my arm out the window, and yelled down to the street, "I really hope you don't mind me taking your picture. I swear I've never seen a car drive faster or peel out quicker." He was gone before my flash was even halfway done going off. He never came back. Later that night, he was sitting outside Lena's house for the first time. He was blocking her driveway, and she pulled up next to him and asked him politely to move so she could get home. And he said, "I bet you want to get home." This was the last conversation and experience any of us had with him, and haven't seen him since. This might not seem too creepy to some of you, but it was an unmarked, clearly poorly maintained cop car with squeaky brakes. He had the lights, the outfit, everything, but it wasn't until after the summer that we realized that maybe this guy wasn't a real cop. And if he was, he really has no respect for his position or how he treats people, and clearly abuses his authority. I still always check when someone with squeaky brakes passes my house. This is a story that pops back up in my mind from time to time. I've only told it to a few people, but I definitely feel like it deserves its place in here. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I've ever had as a child. Back when I was around 10 years old, my mom finally decided it was time to get her license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. For that reason, my dad decided that he wanted to do some practice with her, besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure that she'd pass the upcoming test her first try. My little brother and I were attending swimming lessons at this nearby university at the time. Behind a forested area near the university lays this huge student parking area, surrounded by trees, which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw the opportunity to take my mom here to drive around for a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them since we were too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us. When we arrived to the parking lot later on in the evening, my parents began their practice. My little brother and I quickly got bored though, and asked if we could go over to this little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us, since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us while driving around. After playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around on the other end of the parking lot. They were approximately 300 to 400 meters away from my brother and I. Suddenly, this white Toyota pulls into the parking lot. We were playing almost right at the exit and entrance. The car turns around and stops on my right side with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolls down his windows and presents himself as Thomas. He looked friendly and was good looking and young. I guess would be around 30. This is where things started to get weird. On the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could see was long blonde hair, and on the back seat was a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately states that he's from the police, that we have to get in the car immediately as he has to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck my arm out in front of his chest, as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us again to get in the car, or else he had to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. Suddenly, the woman put down the newspaper, showed her face, and told us in the most calmly motherly voice to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At this moment, I began screaming as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have time to drive to us since the road down the parking lot twisted all the way. When my dad heard my scream, he started yelling as loud as he could. "Hey, who the F are you? Get the F away from my children." As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized my brother and I weren't alone, he threw his car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shat himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat the guy up himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. He never found out who these people were, but this episode taught me to never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you, or the ones you love. I'm not sure what these people would have done to us. I am sure about one thing though. They definitely weren't from the police. This is a story my friend told me that happened to her older sister. She goes to a large private religious university in Utah. She was staying in an apartment not too far away from campus with 3 other girls. The semester had just started and 2 of the 3 girls were asleep. My friend's sister was on her phone sitting in the living room when she heard what sounded like footsteps outside the window behind her. She listened closely and dismissed it as a stray cat or dog. Soon after, she heard a thud against the dining room wall coming from the outside, and heard what sounded like muffled whispering. My friend's sister is an excellent marksman, so she decided to scare whoever was outside off by opening the blinds, turning on the lights, and grabbing the shotgun she kept on the mantle, and pointing at the window while screaming for the other girls to wake up. She saw a short man wearing all black and a ski mask running away. The cops came shortly after and she filed a report. Fast forward to a few weeks later, my friend's sister keeps seeing a small white truck with tinted black windows following her. She dismisses it as her imagination, but it freaks her out a little. One weekend, her roommates have gone out of town, so it's just her by herself. Right as she's trying to fall asleep, she hears a pounding sound at her door. She bolts to the door and looks through the peephole to see a cop standing there. "Who are you?" she asks. "I'm a cop," says the guy. "Open up, it's the law," he yells menacingly. My friend is starting to call bullshit, but she's scared of disobeying him if he actually is a cop. "Why are you here so late?" she asks. "Remember a few weeks ago when that guy tried to break in your house? I have an update on him." My friend is freaking out now, because why would a cop come to try to talk to her about the case so late, and by himself? He wasn't even the officer who helped her fill out her report. "Show me your badge," she demanded. He pulled it out and shoved it into the peephole, and my friend sighed a breath of relief. Right as she was unlocking the door, she glanced down at his legs, and noticed this cop had very elevated platform boots, a machete on his utility belt, and the name on his uniform didn't match the name on his badge. "You are not a fucking cop," she yelled at him. Fake cop screamed and started slamming on the door, saying, "I am an officer of the law, and you will obey me. Open up. Police." She called 911 and held her weight behind the front door, clutching her shotgun until the cops arrived. The guy was long gone by then, but he left behind his cap, which was a prop from a party store. The day after this, my friend broke her lease, moved to a new city in Utah, transferred schools, and bought a Doberman to keep her company. I never caught the guy, so hopefully he never does this to another girl again.